economies away from oil. But why does oil matter? Well, the first thing to understand why it matters is what it is used for. These are the kind of things many of you will kind of know oil's used for. Diesel fuel, fuel oils, the kind of liquids that we put into our cars, into our ships, into our planes to get our various transportation needs fulfilled. Kerosene, a heating oil in many ways, so to provide us with energy in its different forms. But oil is much, much, much more than that. It is a huge hydrocarbon chain which we cut up. Many of our needs come from what we call the middle distillates, middle chains, if you like. And we're known as a particularly middle distillate society here in the West because that's what we predominantly use. But actually, 85% of organic materials that are used come from oil. These are a lot of the kinds of names here. And it might be a surprise, for example, I see many, I've just got my first set of glasses. Many people are wearing glasses around here. It's not glass we have, or very rarely glass we actually have in our lenses. It's plastic. That's made from oil. Much of the clothing we are wearing is usually, those of us who are better off, cotton, but for many of us, cotton blends or straight synthetic materials. This is all oil. Many of the medications we use are made from oil. The humble aspirin, originally distilled from the bark of the willow tree. I vaguely remember many years ago my grandma, when I was complaining of a headache while we was out, stripping a bit of bark off a tree and getting me to chew on that. And that solved it. So it shows the age of my grandma, I'm afraid, in many ways. And that got rid of the headache, but now many of these common compounds we use are actually developed from oil. Phil mentioned about agriculture. One of the big areas I'm interested in when I investigate this particular issue is the agricultural system, is our food system. And our food system is very heavily tied up to oil and our energy systems. I was expecting to see the main oil-based costs to be based on diesel use on many machines on farms. I got a big surprise. The vast majority of the costs was in fertilizer, herbicides, insecticides, pesticides. All these sides, those killers, as it were, those things that get rid of the nasties that feed on our food, helps keep us with high yields, they're petrochemicals. They're very expensive petrochemicals. They are the majority of the costs in growing crops. Fertilizer, not a petrochemical as such, but heavily dependent upon hydrocarbons for its production. Again, a very expensive product to produce and a big part of the costs in producing and growing crops. And in 2007, 2008, just as the price of oil shot up, we saw the prices of fertilizers and these petrochemicals, these agricultural petrochemicals, doubling and tripling in price. 2007, 2008 was a big shock for many of us in terms of the food system. Food prices went up. We can all remember Hovis bread going over £1 for a loaf, and various riots around the world because people could not afford food. In fact, a number of countries removed their food production off the world food market. In this country, if it hadn't been for the food increases, many farmers, especially dairy farmers, would have found themselves against the wall because of the massive increase in costs of their productive inputs. Okay? So oil isn't just simply something that gets us around the streets or lubricates machines. It is something that is absolutely essential to our modern way of living. We are petroleum man. Our whole economy, our whole world is configured around oil. So the peaking of oil, the fact that actually we're going to get less oil out of the ground year on year, month on month, week on week, matters to us seriously if we want to see growth. What we see here is consumption of oil, thousands of barrels a day. And Europe's quite interesting. We don't seem to increase our consumption of oil very much year on year for a long time. We've hit kind of a peak demand. The US and its thirst for SUVs, its big vehicles, and its love of driving, the driving season throughout the summer, its oil consumption has continued to increase. But the interesting one is Asia and Oceania, India, China. And their consumption of oil has been growing at a phenomenal rate since the year 2000 and has placed a lot of pressure on oil supplies since the year 2000. And this is an important point here about this growth, because what is India and China doing? They're growing, they're developing, they're getting bigger and bigger. We can see one of the historical events of the 21st century is going to be the growth in power of the East. A balance of power shifting from west to east in many ways. But it's interesting to note, the solid line is oil use, the dotted line is GDP per capita. So as a country becomes more wealthy, it must increase its oil consumption. If you're a developing state and you want to get 1% of growth, you must increase your oil consumption by 1% as well. And the converse is true. If there's a contraction in the economy of 1%, then you reduce your oil consumption by 1%. That also means, unfortunately, if oil production is reduced by 1%, because of the way our economy is configured, it will enforce a contraction of the economy by 1%. And this is one of the reasons I believe we've already hit peak oil due to what has happened over the last 18 months. So what does this mean for the UK? I'm going to do a little bit of history, okay? And I know many of you in this room are probably not old enough to remember the mid-70s, so I'll explain a little bit about the mid-70s. But I'm also going to talk about 2007, 2008 with a price spike and give you a bit of an idea how I believe that the economy and oil are quite intricately linked and why we're potentially having a look at peak at the moment. And a little bit about public sector impact. This here is a number of graphs about UK oil use. The blue one is our imports and exports. So, for a long time, we've been importing a hell of a lot of oil. We've had to buy it to be able to use it. And then the yellow line shows us production. Sort of mid-70s, production begins to take off. We begin to produce more and more oil, and that in turn reduces the amount that we have to import to the point in which we begin to export. The red line is how much we consume. Interesting to note how most developed countries do not increase their consumption, even though they grow their economy. We tend to outsource a lot of our manufacturing. Okay? We still have a lot of manufacturing. The Midlands has a hell of a lot of manufacturing in it still. But we do outsource much, much more of our manufacturing in terms of growth. Much of our growth is in terms of service sector development. Okay? And we also have much more efficient manufacturing sector than in many parts of the world. Okay?